Hi everyone, and welcome to the third week and session 4. This week we have the discussion about knowledge codification and sharing. In this first video I will only talk about the knowledge codification, and the second part will be on the knowledge sharing. So if you remember from our general dynamic model, we already discussed the knowledge creation, and basically once organizations collected knowledge in their knowledge base, a very important dynamic is how they can actually codify the knowledge that they have. Let's get into the knowledge codification. So you may wonder why knowledge codification is so crucial. And I think the answer comes from our daily experiences. When I'm writing an essay or a text, when I'm interviewing with someone, I'm codifying my knowledge. When you are taking an exam, you are codifying your knowledge. Basically, what I can have as your result of the exam to grade is all dependent on how properly you codify your knowledge. When we communicate with each other, we are codifying our knowledge. When you are working in your office, creating some reports, analyzing certain patterns, you are codifying certain knowledge. And of course, when we are working in teams, we are designing an object, we are designing a technology, or producing an idea. Again, we are all busy with the knowledge codification. So it's basically essential for almost any knowledge intensive activities that we have. But then if we ask a little bit more deeply, what does it mean, knowledge codification? Then you will see normally this definition, that knowledge codification is transformation of tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. Basically, it means that we have something which is tacit, and then if we codify, at the end of the process, we get into codified knowledge. But still, you may wonder, what does it mean, explication of the knowledge, and how basically something that is inherently tacit can be codified. There are scholars that are actually against this first definition, because they believe that knowledge cannot be transformed into explicit completely. What they actually suggest as the definition of codification is that codification doesn't mean that you make your knowledge into something which is code. Rather, they say that codification is a way that you show, you signal what knowledge you have. There is a whole difference between these two situations. If I have a piece of diamond and I just write a letter to you and say, look, this is just know that I have this diamond, and I show you a picture of my diamond, I didn't give you the diamond. I just showed you an information about the diamond. So this second perspective of codification still considers codification important, but does not consider codification as a way of replacing tacit knowledge by codified knowledge. So if you go through the reading, especially comparing, for instance, the perspective of Davenport with the perspective of Nonarkal, you see these two views are completely separate in these two streams of thinking. But then why codification is important? There are basically three main reasons about codification. One important part is basically if we codify certain knowledge, we can reuse it more easily in other contexts. So if you remember the famous Matrix movie, this is a very interesting episode of that Matrix, which nicely shows that the codification of knowledge, how can help the reapplication of the knowledge in other contexts. Just very briefly watch this part.
Not yet.
Operator.
Tank, I need a pilot program for a D-212 helicopter. Hurry. Let's go.
So that's basically one idea, that if we codify knowledge, then we can send it, transfer it to the other areas, to the other time, to the other locations, and it can be easily reused. Of course, there are a lot of limitations to that, but still it's an effective way of codifying knowledge. Now I'm giving this lecture and making it into a video for you. It's a way of transferring this knowledge to your site. Still, there is another important reason for codification, and that's called formalization and standardization of knowledge. If you are familiar with the ISO standards, this is the organization that offers the standards for different procedures, such as safety procedures or whatever. This is also another way of using codification. If you codify certain knowledge, you make it standard, you make it explicit, and it becomes formal and consistently used throughout the whole parts of the organization. And the third reason is related to what we call it the knowledge protection. It sounds a little bit paradoxical, because if you think about codification, it makes it more likely to send the knowledge, to share the knowledge to the outside. So if you codify knowledge, it's more likely that the knowledge leaks out. However, there are reasons or situations that we codify knowledge actually to protect it. And that is basically the case of patenting your ideas. So if you register your idea legally under certain systems, you are protected. So others know that you have this knowledge. They know slightly about your idea, but based on the regulation, because you registered, they are not allowed to reuse your knowledge. And that's another reason that we think about codification of the knowledge, especially when the knowledge is highly competitive. So that was about what is knowledge codification and why we need, or we should think about codification, in which situations or for which purposes knowledge codification is effective. Let's talk about how knowledge codification can happen. And I think there it's important to think about a range of factors here. So it's in a way a sort of framework for different aspects of knowledge codification, and you can use this framework for actually advising organizations on how to go through the codification of their knowledge. And it starts by the content of the knowledge, and then what is the aim of the knowledge codification and for whom you are doing this codification, in which context the codification is happening, what are the carriers of the codification, how you make a combination between the codified knowledge and the tacit knowledge, and finally how the codified knowledge is again decoded back to something that people can understand and work with. Let's start with the content. If you are thinking about codifying certain knowledge, one of the first questions is that which knowledge domains are you going to codify? So remember, from the knowledge strategy process, all knowledge domains are not worth being managed, only the most important ones. And one of the big mistakes of many knowledge management practices, many organizations made this mistake and still make it, is that when they say we want to codify our knowledge, they just want to codify all knowledge domains. However, they have to actually prioritize only the critical ones, or the ones that are most important. And the second question about the content, we need to ask, what is the nature of this knowledge domain? Because depending on different areas of knowledge, different domains of knowledge, some of them are more explicable. They lend themselves to be easily codified. So if you think about the knowledge of booking process, so ticket booking process, that can be easily codified into certain steps and procedures, whereas if you think about a very artistic knowledge of, for instance, painting, that is much more difficult to be codified. And of course, depending on the knowledge domain you're thinking about, this might be more to the left or to the right in terms of codifiability of the knowledge. Actually, Davenport has a very interesting discussion on more elaborate dimensions of codification or codifiability of the knowledge. So make sure that you check out in the book. The second point relates to the aim and the audience of knowledge codification. So why we want to actually codify knowledge and for whom this knowledge codification happens. I mean, without these two questions, knowledge codification just results in wasting time and efforts. And even before codification, we have to always think about the cost-benefit analysis and think about the costs of knowledge codification and compare them against the benefits that our organization may gain from the codification. And of course, there are a lot of, detailed costs and benefits on each side. So we as organizations need to be very careful about quantifying these costs and benefits. And at the end, if it's worth doing, we can engage in the codification. The third element of this framework relates to the context. Basically, it relates to first the people who are engaged in the codification. I mean, codification involves people, those who know something about a certain knowledge or certain areas. They need to actually explicate their knowledge. Do they have enough incentives to do that? Or actually they have disincentives against the codification? Always the codification process involves certain powers and politics. Some people don't want to codify certain knowledge. Some others want to hoard it and keep it for themselves. How we want to actually deal with this contextual power dynamics, and how codification can be actually embedded into the daily practices. Should we actually find a separate team dedicated to the codification, or we can find a way that as people work do their own daily work, naturally they codify their expertise and knowledge. So you can find interesting examples in the books and the readings that show how knowledge codification can be naturally embedded into the daily practices. When the knowledge is going to be codified, you have certain choices in terms of the carrier of the knowledge, the codified knowledge. It can be into the text, graphics, voice, video, software, avatar, and many other ways that are coming. And of course, these days it's all about the question about the digital ways of codifying knowledge. I mean, before there were both digital and non-digital. I think these days non-digital ways very often are quite limited in terms of the power that they have. But still, there is an important question related to which of these carriers are more effective for your own case. The next element relates to the tacit elements. Again, back to the definition of the knowledge codification. When we codify knowledge, we write something about the diamond. We take a picture about the diamond. So it's not yet the diamond itself. So if we want to have an effective knowledge management processes, we need to think about how codified knowledge is still connected with the tacit knowledge to which these codes are related. And there, I think it's interesting to think about the taxonomy that we have about different types of knowledge. Knowledge can be codified, but next to that, part of this tacit knowledge is embrained in the mind of the people who had this. Part of that is embodied in basically the skills, dexterities of these people, and part of that embedded in the organizational routines, in the culture, and in the norms. So these three other aspects, embrained, embodied, and embedded, need to somehow be connected to the codified knowledge. And basically, organizations win with the codification that can connect their codified knowledge with the tacit elements connected to them. And eventually, the knowledge that is codified needs to be decoded, needs to be understood by the receivers of these codes. Otherwise, they cannot actually understand and they cannot actually use it. If I show you this picture and I ask you, can you understand it? It depends. If you are perhaps a cardiologist, you easily detect that and you feel that this is a scan of the lung of the patient. But if you don't have that background knowledge, you are not able to decode this piece of information. And I think that's why we have this interesting quotes by Nietzsche, who talks about the experience of people is something crucial for decoding. So if I want to decode certain knowledge, it's always helpful if I have certain experience in that knowledge domain. So just to wrap up, codification sometimes is considered as making tacit knowledge into explicit, but go critical to that, and I think this is not a very good definition. And the alternative definition is something that is more powerful. Think about the 3 reasons that codification is important and relevant. Sharing knowledge is only one of them. Still, there are 2 other important reasons. And when we think about how we codify knowledge, it's important that we think about the whole elements around the codification, not just the code itself, but also all these systems around the aim, the context, carriers, the tacit elements, and the way that the knowledge is going to be decoded. So make sure that you read the book chapter by Davenport and check out the discussions we have on the canvas about the codification.